If I were told I could only use one of all the lenses I own, I would have to go with the Sigma 18 to 50 millimeter. The hell? Here we are, the Sigma 18 to 50 millimeters. This thing has been a real treat to use. And when it comes to making my already very portable camera even more portable while keeping it rather versatile, or if you're just looking for an upgrade over the stock Sony lens, which can be interesting, then I cannot recommend this thing to you more. Why is that? Well, let's get into it. Hello everyone, Ben Gray Digital here, and if you haven't already figured it out, today we're looking at the Sigma 18 to 50 millimeter f2.8 APS-C lens on my Sony a6400. And for $500, this thing definitely gives you what you're paying for. Starting with the focal range, you get a nice wide 18 millimeters, while on the zoomed in side you get a nice 50 millimeters. This zoom pretty much covers all of your bases. 18 millimeters is wide enough to capture almost any scene in its entirety, while going all the way through to 50 millimeters, there are a few marked numbers. These numbers are most common focal ranges that you would find on full-frame prime lenses. Never have I come across being frustrated with not being able to capture whatever scene I see with this lens. It has treated me very well. Moving on to the aperture, this lens gives you a nice wide f2.8 all the way to f22. f2.8 is a pretty wide open aperture, helping with low light condition shots and creating a decent background blur, especially when zoomed in to 50 millimeters. f22 lets things get dark. If you're a fan of long exposures, which is something I can get behind, say waterfalls or moving subjects, then this lens is pretty solid. Now, one of the main selling points for me with this lens was the fact that it can hold f2.8 all the way through the focal range. So, no matter how zoomed in you are, you will always get that wide open aperture, which I will say again, very much helps with low light conditions, especially because that is a bit of a struggle with APS-C cameras. One of my favorite parts about this lens, which is not something that they directly talk about as a selling point with this lens, but I think it should be, is its minimum focus distance. I feel like this thing doubles as a macro lens with just how close you're able to get to subjects. Sigma claims it's able to focus at 4.8 inches W, maybe W for wide, and minus 11.9 inches T for maybe telephoto. Let's learn a thing or two. W usually stands for the working distance between the subject and the front of the lens. T doesn't usually come up in this kind of calculation, but could mean the distance between the sensor and the object, or the thickness of the lens. With that being said, numbers do not matter, because you can get close as a hell with this lens. Hello everyone, Ben Gray Digital here from the Ben Gray Digital headquarters. And to demonstrate the minimum focus distance, I will be using the backside of this Intel Xeon CPU that was found in the back of one of my friend's cars. Shown here is the minimum focus distance while zoomed all the way in at 50 millimeters. As you can see, you can get pretty close, and at this range you can get some nice background blur. And seen here is the minimum focus distance at 18 millimeters. This thing can get so close, it's kind of freaking insane. And because I use this lens so much, I get very comfortable with how close you can get. And it's a bit of a shock when you use a lens that isn't able to get as close as this thing is. In the recording of my Sony a6400 video, I needed to use my boyfriend's Fujifilm FX3 because I was shooting a video of the camera that I use to shoot video. On that camera was an f2.8 50 millimeter lens, I think. Using that lens was a bit of a struggle because of the minimum focus distance. It felt like it was like 3 feet away, and if any closer, it was not able to focus on it, which was very difficult. So making space was not easy. That's why I chose to record outside, so that I would have enough room to fit my entire person. And at the time, my room was quite a bit of a mess, though I'm not sure why I chose to record next to that very loud fountain. With that being said, that video did continue the streak of, well, Ben Gray awkward seating arrangements. Moving on to the build, this thing is made with some very durable hard plastic. And while weighing in at around 290 grams, with some very interesting dimensions of 2.4 inches around and 3 inches tall, this thing is very comfortable to use. This lens not only feels premium, but also contributes to not only the look of the Sony a6400, but the portability of both the camera body and this lens. Paired together, this thing is an absolute beast. This lens is incredible, and I love everything about it. But there are some alternatives. The Tamron 17 to 70mm is very similar to this thing. And for $150 more and a bit of a heavier build, you get a bit more of a lens. Something I noticed post-recording is that these lenses are actually fairly similarly priced. The Sigma goes for around $650 while the Tamron goes for about $700. It's just that sales do happen quite a lot, so you can get these lenses for a significant discount if you just wait a little bit. I personally got mine on quite a bit of a discount. I think I got it for around $500, which is a pretty good discount, all things considered. With that being said, let's say there aren't any discounts and you have the option between the Sigma being $50 less than the Tamron. Honestly, the pros and cons kind of weigh each other around weirdly. If you like macro stuff, both lenses are going to work. The Sigma will work a little better, but the Tamron will give you a bit more versatility at the cost of weighing a bit more and having a bit bulkier of a design. It all kind of depends on what your preferences are and how much you're willing to spend, but I'll go over a few more of the differences in just a second. Looking purely at the numbers, the Tamron 17 to 70mm gives you a bit more of a focal range, 1mm on the wider side and about 20mm on the zoomed in side, which can make the zoom a bit more versatile. Although, that lens does have the same f2.8 aperture. In addition, the Tamron does come with optical stabilization, which means if you have a camera, like I do, that does not have built-in in-body stabilization, that does help stabilize video and low light, low shutter speed photos. With that being said, the Tamron does not have as close of a minimum focus distance as this. It still does have a decent minimum focus distance, just not as good as this little thing. Of course, no lens review isn't complete without any photos. And welcome back. If I'm going to be honest, writing this script, I couldn't really think of anything bad about this lens. It's just a generally very good all-purpose APS-C lens. I, however, have one small complaint. When the lens hood is in the face-back stowaway position, it can very easily get in the way of using the zoom. Now, normally with your fingers, it's not anything too difficult. It can be a little in the way, especially here. You just cannot grip it at this part or this part. You can grip it here though, sort of, but the moment you put any sort of gloves on, it's good luck. And you can't just pull it either. There's a locking mechanism on this lens that, while in the 18mm position, it's very difficult to just pull. As you can see, it's hard, and when you have gloves on that make it very difficult to grip, this thing becomes impossible to zoom with. With that being said, this locking feature being in place is actually very useful and is a good thing, I think. Here's an example of a lens that doesn't have that locking feature. You just kind of hold it upside down and it starts zooming on itself. With that being said, this issue is easy to get around. It's not something I would tell you to avoid getting this lens for. You could easily just not have the hood and leave it at home. Another thing you can do is leave it forward. If you're not actively using the lens, leave it at that 24mm mark, because then you can just easily pull it up and down. And there you go, problem solved. Not that much, but it's something to keep in mind in case you're a big fan of wearing gloves while using your camera. Not that big of a problem, just something to keep in mind. This lens is truly incredible. I love pretty much every aspect about it. If I'm going out and I don't want to take much, I will always take this lens. 9 times out of 10, or really 10 times out of 10. There's no other reason I wouldn't bring this lens with me. It's just an amazing lens. But anyways, this has been Ben Gray Digital. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.